and her constancy and her wisdom and her brilliance and her leadership with the committees and with Open Book and with everything. There hasn't been anything that we've done since returning from COVID that hasn't been in lockstep together, she and I, from our learnings together on the Bima, from the high holidays to like our laughter, to her remarkable courage in so many ways. I'm hoping to see her later, but of course we should be praying for her husband Larry, who had a bit of an accident, and we're hoping that he has a complete recovery. But she holds so much for this community, and so just and the Open Book is really what is the Open Book? The power of the Open Book has been so much her brilliant pedagogy and learn and teaching. So so she's here with us. I don't know, she'll be here later, but certainly learning together. I can't think of Open Book without thinking about her sitting here and teaching. So, and all of you, we'll find another TV for you, another big TV. We'll be, in the making. But we'll gather around the table, at the church, which is where it started, and then we'll find another space. As I said last night to in the community last night, that it's the Torah of the space really that matters most, and it matters most. Doesn't matter only. We have to find a good space eventually for our community. But thank you, and Eden. How many people watched Eden's sermon to last week? Right? Yeah, unbelievable sermon. Watch it. I'm watching it so I can learn from her how to give a sermon.
How do we find it? I want to see it.
It's always, you just look on YouTube. It's on the Romemu YouTube page. I know. Where do you go? YouTube.
It's in the sermon from every week is in Romemu now.
Yeah, the sermon for every week is in Romemu now, says the person who owns Romemu now, Eden.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Alina. Dancing queen. Okay, ready? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, tzivanu asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Thank you, Caroline. That was quick. We're just going to be in the beginning of Devarim, everybody. Okay, so I think that Caroline, you put that up the link for everybody. Eila Advarim asher diber Moshe al kol Yisrael. Eila Advarim. We know that there's a general principle in grammar and in the Torah that whenever it says Eile, it means these are the words at that moment. If it would have said Ve'ele, as it says in Parshat Mishpatim, back in Exodus, right in chapter 23, 2:23, it said Ve'ele meant these, and these are the words. So the general principle is that when a vav comes, it connects to what came before. And when there's no vav, it doesn't connect to what came before. But one of the things that's interesting about this is that, of course, it's completely new. The fifth book of Torah is, oh, there she is. I knew she was coming. You have to come and sit with us. I just already said that there's no way that I could teach this morning without you. And, but I didn't call you. So I was late also. You're on time, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're both on time. So we're just going to learn Chumash. We're just going to learn. Rabbi Koleras just came. And this is where we are now. Everything is all on sale. It's all going. It's all going. It's going quick. There's a TV over there. Who wants it? It's like.
The Last Supper. There's a last.
It's the last Marsh, exactly. It's the Last Supper.
The Last Supper.
Oh my God.
Oh, yeah. All right. I need some coffee.
No Judas this time, exactly. Or Mel Brooks, Judas. You want the soup? Oh, yeah, yeah. You know, you know why we started the open book? I started the open book because I felt guilty as a rabbi. It's like, as a liberal rabbi, I thought to myself, I don't work nearly as hard as all the Orthodox rabbis that I grew up with. How much I thought to myself? I thought to myself, what Shabbos at Romemu? I go to shul on Friday night. Friday nights are hard. And then I wake up, I stroll to shul, it starts at 10 o'clock, it's over at 12, 12:30. I thought to myself, what kind of rabbi am I? I'm not teaching Parsha. I'm not doing Mincha. I'm not doing Shalosh Shodis. I'm not doing Havdalah every week. What kind of lazy rabbi? So I remember saying, I told my wife, I said, I got to do more Shabbos for the community. I'm not doing enough. So I said, we got to start learning together. So she said, no, it's going to be too early. It's going to be the kids. We had very young kids. I said, no, we got to start learning early in the morning. We'll start. And it was originally, I think, at 8:30. It was like we had a whole thing. And I just wanted to start off the morning learning Torah together. It turned out that other rabbis do the same thing in the liberal world, so it wasn't so unique. Jeremy Shai. So anyway, so here we are, how many years later? Almost a decade later, Baruch Hashem. And so we're just beginning the book of Devarim. And we're just learning. We have no sheets because there was no printer. And I didn't know there was no printer, so I was making the sheets. Yeah, I was back there as OG. I know. Exactly, perfect. So I was just saying about the ve'ela in Mishpatim versus the Eila here, and that it would seem to be that this is discontiguous from what came before, if that principle holds. Like Eila means, it's not what came before, but in every which way it breaks the model because Devarim is completely based on what came before. It's Moshe's moment to talk to the people before he goes off the scene, before he leaves the scene. And he's going to go over what Deuteronomy itself, the word deuto means second telling, or the Deuteronomy is the second law, or literally it's a repetition of the word, it's a translation of the word Mishneh, from the phrase Mishneh Torah, right? It's a Mishneh Torah. And the second telling of the Torah, which that phrase takes place in chapter 17, verse 18. And there are five of these moments, I guess, discourses and poems that Moshe is going to engage in. And there is also the second, essentially it's the second discourse, meaning in the second part of the five discourses, Moshe will essentially give over the law again. We'll see the Ten Commandments will be given over again in Parshas V'eschanan, and so on. And there is a lot of repetition here. Of course, there's a lot of repetition, but it's also, whenever you tell a story over the second time, you change some of the details. So you'll see in the very beginning of this parsha, Moshe telling the people something that took place, but significantly changing the details, some of the details that were in that story. Just a general overview of the book of Deuteronomy also is that Moshe's voice is incredibly beautiful and poetic. It's some of the most beautiful and easily, from a religious perspective, some of it is quite stunning and easy to sink into and easy to enjoy almost. There's a language here that is absent from other parts of the Torah. There's also a voice of Moshe which is not unfamiliar to many of us, which is chastising, warning, exhorting. He's constantly telling them, be careful that you don't walk away from God's Torah, be careful that you keep God's Torah, be careful, because these are the things that are going to happen to you. So let's learn a little bit of it, and we'll see how Moshe changes the stories. So Eilei Advarim. Oh, one last thing. It's remarkable. Many sources make this point in the Midrash, in the Talmud, the Zohar. It's amazing that a person who called himself Lo Ish Devarim Anochi, I'm not a man of Devarim, of words, and this book, which is entirely in Moshe's voice, begins with Eila HaDvarim. These are the words that the man of no words spoke. And that's an amazing evolution of his own wounded healer kind of leadership. Like he learned to speak, and the very thing that he said to God would be the thing that apostled him, that
Validated.
invalidated him, became.
That's why I came.
You know, oh, thank you. I mean, it's not amazing. It always touches me, right?
Totally.
Like how
So beautiful.
it's beautiful that he has so many.
Especially if you're someone who's shy,
Yeah,
which
which not, I'm not. It's true.
which I am.
You are.
It's
Sort of.
very encouraging.
It is very encouraging. It's true. He's definitely a reticent person that now seems to have had a complete transformation.
It's beautiful. It's really amazing.
He doesn't need Aaron anymore. He doesn't,
I also he becomes a poet, not only a storyteller.
Exactly.
There's a trajectory.
Right.
Yeah.
He's telling his stories, but then he's going to find these crazy, amazing poems to yeah, it's a pretty remarkable thing. There's even, the Zohar goes so far as to say that because Moshe, how could it be that part of the Torah which everybody believed was written by God now is in Moshe's first person narrative? Like he's not speaking in God's voice. So the Zohar makes a radical statement, says, Shchinta dabre mipume de Moshe. The Shechina, the divine presence, was speaking out of Moshe's mouth, which is it's a crazy, crazy, amazing thing to say, that there's almost like an automatic speech here that Moshe is channeling the divine. It's a good way out of the problem, but it's also a radical way out of the problem. So let's look. So Eila Dvarim, verse 1, Asher Dimer Moshe. These are the words that Moshe spoke to all of Israel. And by the way, he spoke all these things to Israel, and including, you'll see in a moment, he's not just saying these things to Israel, but he's saying them also to himself. Because not only will he be critical of Israel, but he'll also be very publicly critical of himself. Right? It's not like Moshe is just going to reserve everything for the Israelites. One of the things about Moshe that's amazing in this first chapter is that he's critical of himself too, and in other places. Be'eva Yarden, on the Transjordan, Bamidbar, in the desert or the wilderness, in the Barava, in the Arava, Mul Suf, near Suf, Bein Paran uvein Tofel, between these two places, Paran and Tofel, and also Lavan the Chatzirot v'di Zahav. That's quite like a Google, like pinpoint. It's exactly in this place, between all these other places. It's where Moshe stood and spoke to them. The Midrash has a lot of to say about this moment, like why we have to know about all these different places and what took place, and where it took place.
There's so much that speaks of liminality, right? There's Aver crossing, Arava sort of transitioning, like
Right.
Bain, right? It's all about being between.
Yes, beautiful. It's all like this is like a book that is
We couldn't hear Rabbi Kolarowsos.
Oh,
I don't know if the owl is not working.
no, we haven't. Maybe this is better right there. Can you hear? Now speak as you said.
Hi, can you hear me now?
It's a little bit quiet, but we could sort of hear you okay. Yeah.
I was just saying that so many of the places sort of bespeak a kind of liminality or transition, like Aver crossing, Arava, which is connected to evening, sort of that liminal time, and then Bain between and Bain between again. So Moshe's really poised in this place, between the wilderness and the promise. That's where he's speaking from. That's it.
Yeah, if the desert, if the wilderness is liminal, this is like liminal shibaliminal. Like this is like they've been in a liminal place and like exactly like, and it's also intense because only he's in the liminal space, because they're all in the liminal space, but he's not passing over.
Exactly.
And he's not passing over.
Exactly.
And he knows that. And the word arava, as you said, is not only liminality, but it's also la'avor, to pass, like he's not going. they're going to go. And so I think that I said last night, I think that will inform a little bit of his voice here. But so verse 2, Achadasar Yom Chorev, 11 days from Chorev, Derech Har Seir, Ad Kadesh Barnea. Okay, so now we know exactly where he is. 11 days from Chorev. Now, maybe this is here to teach you that how easy it would have been for them to get here had they didn't have to go around 40. I mean, Chorev is where they received Torah, right? Chorev is another name for the Sinai area, specifically around the mountain. It's even called, one of the names is called Chorev. It's only 11 days, but it took them 40, and then the very next words are Vayihi Arbim Shana, and it was in the 40th year, right? So maybe that verse is to tell you about the proximity they had to Sinai and how horribly it had gone. So they had to move around 40 years in the desert. It's just 11 days. I mean, you had to be thinking, wow, we're only 11 days and it took us 40 years to get here. That's a pretty horrible thing to be aware of. Derech Har Seir. I don't know exactly, but the way of Mount Seir, of course, that's reminiscent of Esau. The kingdom of Esau. And okay, so here we are. We've arrived, and it was in the 40th year, Be'ashtei Asar Chodesh, in the 11th month, 11, so 11 days, 11th month. In the first of the month, which is basically Shvat, the first day of Shvat, what would later be called Shvat, Moshe spoke to the children of Israel in verse 3. Diber Moshe el b'nei Israel, kechol asher tzivah Adonai oso alehem. It's funny that it says kechol, right? To me, I've always think that sort of like everything that what God said to them, right? Kichol here could also it doesn't have to be a prefix of sort of, it means in accordance to, right? But it also has the valence of he will try to to say what God had commanded, and it kind of is prefiguring its inaccuracy or its shift to some degree. And then it says, after having killed Sichon, the king of the Amorites, Asher Yoshe Cheshbon, who dwells in Cheshbon, as Og Melech HaBashan, Asher Yoshe Eshtaros, Be'edrei. Sichon and Og are if you're growing up, Sichon and Og are like the two giants, right? You just think they go together like, a wink and a smile. Sichon goes with Og goes with Sichon. They're always these two scary, big, big kings, and they have been banished, right? And now, again, they are on the other side of the Jordan. This is repeated. It's a lot of build-up here for what Moshe is going to say. This very beautiful phrase, Ho'il Moshe be'er, et Torah zot lemor. And Moshe began to expound upon the teachings, saying, okay, that's a whole lot of build-up, right? I mean, you can hear, it's almost like the Torah is doing a drum roll. It's like... So he begins to explain the Torah Hazot. Now, what does that mean, the Torah Hazot, when it says it in the Torah? Is the Zot referring to the Torah? Is it referring to what's about to happen? The Torah that was received at Sinai? What's the Torah Hazot? And by the way, the word Be'er here is from the word in Hebrew, Be'ur, which means to make clear. But of course, there are many commentaries that say that this is obviously connected to the word for a well, a Be'er. So the well springs of Torah here, when we named our adult education, right, the well, it was a double play on the well and Be'er, like that right? So what do you think, Rabbi Kollel? What do you think is going on here as we enter into verse 6? What's your take? Just a lot of build-up, or why do we have to know all this stuff before we get to Moshe? Do you think that we get to Moshe's? I have no idea. I'm just asking you because if you have
one thought I have about this is that like we all spend more time than we need to in the wilderness. Like we think like it's a straight line between here and there. It's only 11 days. But to get to what we need to know is actually more like 4 decades. And it feels like we're going around in circles, but we're going to keep going around in circles until we know what we need to know. So they're stuck until this point. They're stuck because they don't know yet.
I don't know.
They don't know.
It takes 40 years.
Like, do you ever feel like you're in the wilderness, you're stuck? You never feel right. Like you're going around in
I'm never
circles,
stuck.
but you're actually going around in circles around the thing that you need to know.
Right. Could they
But
have
so they
done- could
received
there be-
Torah,
and then it takes them
but
40
they
years
didn't
to-
know it.
but
They
then-
didn't know it.
That's
That's what I would say.
Well, I love
And now
it.
they're finally ready.
Now they're ready. But the rabbis say exactly the same point, which is that it takes 40 years to understand your teacher, right? They get that from the ear.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
it doesn't, it takes Arba Shnin until like the Asimon drops, until like you get it. Is there any way to make it quicker? To go 11 days? Is there-
That's a good, I mean, I spent a lot of money in therapy. It didn't really help. But I think it was
Everybody's
T.S.
looking
Eliot,
for
and
the-
maybe Tomas knows actually, who said something like
I know.
knowing something is you go back to the first time you experienced it and experience it more fully.
Right.
Yes, it's something about homecoming.
Right.
That you return and you know it for the first time.
You know it for the first time, even though you experienced it already.
Yeah.
So they now ready to go to Torah and actually experience revelation that they experienced all those decades ago.
I just wish, here's my wish. I think that's so beautiful and so true, and I love that.
Is there a shortcut? I
No, it's
wish
like,
there was.
No, I don't even know. I was gonna say something else. No, maybe there is no shortcut. But
It's
I wish
exhausting.
that the narrative wouldn't blame us for it. In a minute, it's gonna blame us and say, you could have gone 11 days, but because you guys screwed up, you know,
But
I wish
really,
the Torah would
the
have just
truth,
said,
so let's retell it. So the
Yes.
truth is, because they had slave consciousness and they were
Yes.
traumatized,
their parents
their
couldn't.
apertures were constricted,
Right,
right? That's another way to say it.
totally,
And all of our apertures are constricted.
totally. It's just the nature of the beast. It's just, you know,
On the nature of that beast, just to build on what you're saying. I think
Yeah.
You were talking about liminality, right?
Yeah.
That you're in between. You're neither here nor there.
Yeah.
You're neither wet nor dry.
Yeah.
You're kind of stuck in the middle.
Well, here they're not exactly stuck, they're poised. It's a little
Poised,
different. They've been
but-
stuck and now they're poised.
But one foot's on the platform and one foot's on the train, you know. Like
Kind
you're-
of,
you're-
yes.
You're a
Yes.
little bit at the threshold.
Right.
yeah, they're very thresholds.
The only thing I would add to that is about the drum roll is we think of liminality and in between as necessarily being like vague, like where am I, like I can't see clearly where I am. But there's such pain with such precision to so precisely describe the location of this in between. Like it's exactly between this mountain and that valley and this river. And after we did that to that king, and it's the 40th year and the 11th month and the 11th day and all of the, you know, so it's a radical precision in time and space with which this discourse is located. So not to be too therapy about it, but the precise description of the way in which you're lost is how to be found, right?
I love that. Maybe that's the beginning of going forward. I love
You have to
that.
really know the contours of how you are lost, where you are, and describe it so either someone can come and get you, right?
Right,
There's almost like the
right.
coordinates here. It's
Geotag.
like the geotag, exactly.
That is
It's
so
like,
beautiful.
It's really beautiful. Or for yourself to like how I know how I got lost, and now I know how to get out, right? Or I know exactly where I took this route, but here's where I am. I love that. I
But it's
think
also
that's
a way of like describing the muck. You think it's
Right.
indescribable.
Right.
So then you begin to find words, and which means it begins to take shape.
right,
It doesn't have any shape until
but not
you-
too much, because thank God it was only 4 verses. Like if they would have spent, some of us spent 20 verses saying exactly how lost we are. We could be in therapy for 30 years. Moshe's like, okay, you guys, this is how we got here. And by the way,
And then it's Rav Lachem.
and Rav Lachem Sheves, right? They have to
It's
get
enough
going.
already. Get
Exactly.
out of therapy.
Exactly.
It's time to go,
And it
right?
wasn't, and by the way, enough blaming your parents, because you know what? They're dead.
Literally, they're dead here.
They're literally dead.
Literally.
And it was their fault. It's true that you had to wander for 40 years, and it wasn't your fault. It was their fault.
Right.
But let's go.
But it wasn't their fault either because they were slaves.
I know, but the Torah blames
I
them, which
know,
means
I know,
primal.
I know.
It shouldn't-
Hey, Rabbi David, sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to say that we have 2 people online
see,
who'd love
yeah.
to speak. Jay and then Beth.
Yeah, I see, Caroline. Thank you. I see them.
Of course.
But thank you, because you're right. That was the moment. Go ahead, Jay.
Shabbat Shalom. In this roll-up drum roll, I'm intrigued in verse 4 by Yoshev becheshbon. Now, I don't know if that's just modern Hebrew, but cheshbon is an accounting and cheshbon nefesh. So, as you said, this is an accounting both of what went before, of Moshe's accounting of himself. And so I'm wondering, I know it's a place, but I'm thinking maybe it's no accident that that word is there.
I would say you and everybody who's ever said the same thing agrees that it's not there by accident, and that even whatever that means exactly, everything could be there by accident. But like cheshbon, I know already that I saw at least one Torah in a Hasidic sefer that says cheshbon here is about accounting, and it certainly plays well with Moshe's. He's about to give an accounting of the people. He certainly doesn't leave himself out. We have a lot of leaders right now in the Jewish world that people are demanding a cheshbon from. Apparently, there's just this week, one of that very well-known leader, whose name I will not mention, was pushed to ask if he made a mistake, and he said yes. So even though it was hard, impossible, and to get it out of him before this week, he finally said it. And of course, everybody knows that there's going to be a deep cheshbon in the land of Israel about what took place. There's going to be a cheshbon here in America in the Jewish world about everything, and cheshbon in general. I love it. Thank you, Jay. I think
Yeah, that underlines Tomas's point, right?
absolutely,
This is time for cheshbon, for accounting.
totally.
Accountability.
Accounting and
Yeah, yeah.
accountability.
Nice.
Yes.
And an account.
It's in accounting, right? Exactly. Beautiful, Jay. Shkoyach. Beth.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
I wanted to throw out the idea that there are indeed shortcuts. However,
Drugs.
you have to be primed for your shortcut.
Everything is being recorded. There's a cheshbon. But by the way, it's not funny, but it's not. It is funny, but MDMA was like MDMA, PTSD. What a shanda that it was that the FDA is continuing to push back on the overwhelming evidence. Overwhelming, saying they don't have enough evidence. There's overwhelming
They just
evidence.
don't want to
There's more evidence for MDMA working and other psilocybin, other things than exposure therapies like EMDR and other things in the world of trauma. It's amazing. Anyway, go ahead, Beth.
That
Sorry.
was my
Thanks
shortcut, not
well,
yours.
that's not Beth's shortcut. Sorry, Beth. Go ahead. Thanks for-
Okay. We have in addition to the wandering in the desert, we have the constant turning in our minds. Our minds are going. We're on this path, that path. We're ricocheting all around. And there's two possible results of all this ricocheting. One is that you can accidentally ricochet your way into a shortcut by a sudden revelation, a sudden realization. And I'd like to submit that on an individual basis, it's probably a lot easier for one person to find a shortcut than for a whole group of people to find a shortcut. Because in the whole group, you've got, take the ricocheting of one inside one mind and multiply it by however many thousands of people, and you've got a lot of noise. And so the likelihood that you're going to get the right ricochet going to the shortcut and that it can happen, at least among the leaders at the right time, is asymptotically approaching zero. But I do think we can find shortcuts, at least individually, for ourselves. Dibarti.
Shamati.
Shamati.
Yeah, I think that we're making light of it. Obviously, doesn't have to take 40 years. It could take, individuals can find shortcuts. I agree with that 1,000%. I think the general truth, though, about the path is that it's not easy. There are
It's not linear, at least.
It's not
circuitous, right?
It could be circuitous. It could be. In Buddhism, in particular, there are a number of schools of enlightenment. There's the traditional view is that it takes a long time to realize the basic truths the Buddha laid out. There are schools in the Mahayana tradition, in particular Dzogchen, that say that the path is direct and that you can use direct pointing out instructions to get a glimpse of the state of no self or nirvana. And we have similar things in Judaism too, like where you can have a moment. Rav Kook wrote about this, and I reference it all the time. The first chapter of his book on Tshuva, he says, Yesh Tshuva pit omit and Tshuva hadragatit. There's an awareness, a Tshuva process that can happen in a moment, right? Amazing grace, like you have in a moment, like you see it. And then he says that there's a more stage-like unfolding that can take a long time. I think both of those work into the 40-year model. It could be that you have an awareness back in the first year, but it can take you 40 years to get it, right? And you think you get it, and then the next time it comes around, you get it more deeply, and it's more like a spiral than any kind of trajectory that is linear. It's like a kind of spiral, which itself has like a spiral usually has both the circle and the line in it. And yeah, thanks, Beth. All right, let's look a little bit more into the parsha, okay? Adonai Eloheinu, verse 6, Diber Eleinu b'chor v'lemor. That's also repetitious. Okay. Rav lachem sheves b'har hazeh. Enough. It's been too long. Rav lachem, by the way, is a very unique phrase together. Rav lachem. It appears here, but it also appears, by the way. Anybody know? I know that Rabbi Koloresis knows. Anybody knows? It's not Rav lachem in what I'm referencing. It says Rav lach, which is right. Rav lachem is in lachadri. That's true. That's true. It's Rav Lacha, right? It's in the Korach story. In the Korach story,
Too much.
you have too much.
Too much. You have too much.
Why are you rebelling? You have, Rav Lach. You have enough. Sheves Barazeh. Enough sitting at this mountain, dwelling at this mountain. Stayed long enough here. Penu u'se'ulachem, turn and go. Uvohar and Marie come to the mountain of Emoriv, El Kol Shchenav, and to all of its to all of the neighbors. Barava, Bahar, Vashvela, Vanega, Bachav Hayam, Eretz Hakanani, Velvanon, Ana Nahar Gadol, Nahar Purat. So God tells him to get moving, go to that hill country, the Shvela, the Negev, the sea coast, to the land of the Canaanites and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, which is the Euphrates River. Re'eh, Natati Lefnechem Ta'aretz. Look, I have given you this land. Bo Reshut Haaretz, come and inherit the land, take possession of it. Asher Nishbad Another Botechem, that has been sworn and in an oath to your ancestors, to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Latit Lehem Ulazar'am Achrehem. That, in other words, the long-awaited promise of the ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will be is yours. It was promised to them and to their heirs after them, which are you. Now Moshe begins to say what he said. Va'omar alechem, and I said to you, ba'eta hilemor, at that moment, lo uchal levadi se'et etchem. I cannot carry you all by myself. Which is weird. What story is he now retelling? What is the story in the book of Exodus?
The meat story.
The
meat story.
Yeah, well,
Right?
no.
Isn't it
No,
when they
before-
want to eat meat? No.
No, this is before the meat, I think. I can't carry you. Is the Jethro story. It's a chapter.
Oh, but then again, he says it to God.
He
I
says it
can't
to God, I
carry-
can't handle
with the
them
meat story.
in the meat story.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the meat story. This is a constant refrain of Moshe. We don't know which one it is because he's
But he
always
doesn't
saying.
say it to Yitro.
Right.
Yitro says it to him.
Exactly. That's a good point. That's
So
the
that's
point.
why I'm referring to the
That's
other
why
one.
it's
Yeah.
confusing. Because you'll see in a second that he's clearly talking about Jethro because of what comes next, which is, I can't handle you, so let's set up courts.
Got it.
That's a Yitro moment.
Yes.
So this takes you all the way back to the beginning of chapter 18 of the book of Exodus, where he's already changing. Right here, he changes whose idea it was. Right? I can't handle you, but I said I can't handle it. No, Yitro said you can't handle it. Right? So Adonai Elohechem yibatchem v'yinchem hayom kechovei hashamayim larov. He says in verse 10, God has made you numerous, and now you are as numerous as the stars of the sky in number. And then he doesn't say you should be smaller. He says, may God, increase you 1,000-fold and bless you. As God has said he would. And then he says again, he says, this is obviously, there's many connections made to this and to the book of Lamentations of Eicha. This is an instance of Eicha. How can I carry you? Place for you wise men, understanding men with knowledge, according to your tribes, and I will place them on you, to lead you. Vatanuoti, and you said to me, Vatomru tova davar shedibarta lasod, and you all said this is a good idea, tov. Now, this whole thing is a completely different story than the Jethro story. The Jethro story, do people remember the Jethro story? Jethro saw Moses and said to him, and this was before the Torah was given in chapter 19, this is chapter 18. And Jethro said, how could you it's going to kill you. Navolti Bol, he said, you're going to wither away. And now Moshe is retelling the story, the simplest, and he's completely, first of all, he's saying, I said that I couldn't handle you, which was not the case, right? Number one. Number two, I'm the one who had the idea to put all of the different, he's taking credit for something his father-in-law told him to do. And then he said, you all said it was a good idea. No, but there was no mention of the children of Israel, agreeing it was a good idea. It was all, there was no mention of God, nothing. It was all between Jethro and Moses completely decided all this thing on his own. Jethro said, this is what you should do. And Moshe said, that's a good idea. And Moshe implemented it. So all of this is a complete retelling of the story. Now the elegant answer for this, let's go to the end of it, and then we can go back. So what happened? I put in verse 15, Vayikachet Roshei Shivtechem, right? Anashim Chachamim Viduim, and I placed them as heads upon you. Sarei Alafim, Sarei Meot, Sarei Chamishim, Sarei Atzarot, V'shotrim L'Shivtechem, V'atzaveh Shivtechem Ba'et Ahi, verse 16, Lemor Shamoa Bein Achechem Ushvatetem Tzedek. Listen, hear out your fellow man, and then, right, adjudicate justly between one person and another, and and strangers as well. Lo takiru panim b'mishpat. Do not be partial in judgment. It's an amazing phrase, takiru panim, meaning because you know somebody, don't let that distort the way that you judge. The katan gadol, whether they are great or small, tishma'un, listen, lo tagur mipnei ish, don't be afraid. Ki hamishpat l'Elohimu, because God's judgment is above your fear. If anything is difficult to you, then bring it to me. At that moment, I told you all the various things that you have to do. Okay. First story that is being told, the story of Moshe's overwhelm and the response. And it was given to him by his father-in-law, and he took it for his own. So the first, most elegant explanation, of course, is that you have multiple sources that are being put together here, compiled, and that's what you get when you have an editor that is not that, attuned to these differences. That's one way we could explain it. Another way we could explain it would be something negative or positive or something like Moshe can't, distorts it. It's like he can't remember well. And like 40 years is a long time, and the story has undergone a couple of, and he forgot that it was his father-in-law. Maybe he didn't want to admit that it was his father-in-law. Maybe what his father-in-law, what was originally too embarrassing for him as a leader to admit, which was that he couldn't handle it, and his father-in-law had given him that reflection. Now, after 40 years, he can acknowledge that he was trying too hard or he had too much on his plate. And taking credit is not negative. It's not going to be brought before like a House, congressional panel for perjury, for plagiarism. But it's a sign of his own emotional health that he's able to acknowledge it, and at least that part might be redemptive. Wendy, what do you think?
I was thinking that Moshe didn't want to bring up.
Can't hear.
Yeah, hey, sorry, we can't hear. Could the person speak up louder, or could you just reiterate what they're saying, please?
Yeah, we will. Thank you,
Thank you.
John. Yeah.
He didn't want to bring up Jethro because of all of the battles that they had against the Midianites.
Maybe because the Midianites, where Jethro was from, they had many battles. Wendy is saying this, that they had many battles. So she is saying that maybe Jethro was a painful thing to remember, or because of the wars since he left. Anything else, sorry?
No, that, I think that may be the reason why he didn't mention Jethro, because here they had, fought multiple battles against the Midianites, and why would you want to give credit to someone you
Right.
know
So it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to think, because it happens in Jewish history in many, many forms later on, where someone who's become, let's say, a particular heretic, and would otherwise, if you put the words that they had said in print, or you say them in their name, they wouldn't be accepted. But all of a sudden, if you just give someone else the credit for it, their brilliant insight can be included into our tradition. This happened with Christianity, with authors who had come across, various strands of, that they wanted to quote Jesus or quote the New Testament, instead they spit it in somebody else's mouth. It happens very strongly from the 16th, 17th century until the 19th century, particularly with Shabtai Tzvi, who was a heretic, who was thought to be the Messiah. He and Jacob Frank and other very, brilliant Kabbalistic ideas that were very heterodox make their way into the Jewish world by not being named. We heard in the name of one great Chacham that there was this idea, and it kind of appears in books, and you're like, oh, if you trace that idea's history, it really was in some heretical book. You have this, I remember reading a treatise by a meditation expert in the ultra-Orthodox world from the early 20th century, and Professor Alan Brill at YU had traced almost all of the insights in that book to some pamphlet of some American guru, and that it's unbelievable, and it's almost word for word lifted, but of course he doesn't say that it was written in the pamphlet. I'll just take credit for it, because if he were to say that it was from some guru, you know what I mean, nobody would listen to it. So it's very brilliant insight. Moshe loved what Jethro said, but maybe not just his own pain, but maybe the people who had to fight against the Midianites would be like, are you quoting a Midianite priest right now? That's great. That's great. Never would have thought of that. That's really interesting. Anybody else? Yeah, Dvor.
Continue. Moshe keeps repeating again and again that he's sick of all the bickering and fetching. And I realize that could be one of the reasons that slows people down from getting from point A to point B. That fetching, even if we're not saying out loud with our minds.
The constant blame, fetching annoyances, and it's always victim. Yeah.
That slows people down.
Right. Now back to the broader flow here that we were talking about earlier. What gets you stuck for 40 years can be, one of the pieces can be what's actually happening. Is that Moshe is often remembering the slights, the pains, I definitely don't know what you're talking about, but I can certainly relate to that for sure. Should we go forward a little bit, or are we going to get stuck here? What do you think? Let's go. Okay. Verse 19. Vanisa mechorev v'nelech. We left Chorev. We went into the wilderness that is the great wilderness that is awesome. Asher item derechim. We went by the way of the Amorites. Kasher tzva Adonai Eloheinu etchem. Or Tanu rather. Vad manavo ad Kadesh Barnea. We came to Kadesh Barnea. Va'omar alechem. I said to you, Batem ad Har Moriah Asher Adonai Eloheinu noten lanu. And we've come to this Amorite mountain, the hill of country of the Amorites that God is giving to you. And look, he keeps saying, look, God is giving you, before you, the land, Ale Resh. Go up and take it. The word Resh here from Yerusha, to take it, possession. Right? It's up to you to go take it, and don't be afraid, and do not be dismayed, or don't tremble at all, right? Be strong. But, verse 22. But even though I told you that it's yours and told you not to be afraid, you were terrified. You all came to me and said, we want to send men before us to reconnoiter the land. This is, of course, what? The story of the spies. And they'll bring back a davar, a word, the path that we should take to go up, right? Which are the to be selective and precise in the ways that we enter the land and which places we conquer first. Vayitav be'inai hadavar, and the thing was good in my eyes. The second story where something was good in someone's eyes. Vayikach became shnei masar anashim ish echad lashav, and he's going to retell the story. And we took 12 men from one from each tribe. Vayifnu, vayalu ahara, vayavo ad nachal Eshkol, and he's going to retell the story. They came to the wadi of Eshkol, vayiraglu ota, and they spied it out. Vayikhu biyadam mipriaretz, they took in their hands fruit of the land, vayoridu eleinu, and they brought it back to us. Vayashivu otan davar, and they did in fact bring back a word. Vayomru tova ad aretz asher ad nalhinu doten lanu, it is a good land. It's like the third or fourth time the word tov is being employed. Velo avitem lalot, but you did not want to go up. And by the way, he doesn't, of course, mention here a lot of things, but he doesn't mention that they also said it's not such a good place. He just said it's a good place, and nonetheless, without any other piece of you didn't want to go up, as if like there was no danger. And you're in your tents, you were sulking. It's really amazing. I don't even know if vateragnu. You sulked in your tents. Because God hates us, God has taken us out of Egypt, in order to bring us here to die, to be destroyed by the Amorites. Right? Says, what kind of place are we going up to? Our kinsmen have taken the heart out of us. They blamed our brothers. Now he puts the words into their mouths, not into the mouths of the spies, but they say that the spies told us that we are going to be there. These people that are stronger and taller than we are, big cities. And then I said to you, do not be afraid in verse 29. Who was the one that told him not to be afraid? It wasn't Moshe, it was
Yoshua and Caleb.
Yoshua and Caleb. Moshe.
It's like Chidon Tanakh.
I know, it's like crazy, right? Like you have to know, like,
Yeah.
right?
This is just a parenthesis, I can't resist, but as long as we're in Bronze Age texts,
Yeah.
sulking in the tent
Yeah.
is like an epic phrase, because the entire text of the Iliad, Homer, comes from Achilles sulking in his tent. Like the entire action of that.
Can you hear
of that
Thomas?
epic.
No,
Yeah, please reiterate or put the camera on him. Thanks.
Just the idea of sulking in the tent in the context of a Bronze Age epic narrative is so powerful, because the entire text of the Iliad and the Odyssey that follows comes because Achilles, the great flawed hero, sulks in his tent instead of doing the things that he's commanded to do by his own gods and prophets. So something about sulking and something about tents, a temporary encampment, and then refusing to leave the temporary encampment, and what it is to sulk. Like I just can't believe that's a coincidence, because
It's very powerful. In fact, that becomes the reason given, one of the reasons given for the Israelites not for Tisha B'Av, is that we cried for no reason, we sulked for no reason. It's like it was always a hard thing to read that we were being punished for sulking, but like it is referenced by the rabbis that the sulking and the crying for no reason, right, was like, because you cried for no reason, there's going to be a good reason to cry, right?
Yeah.
Which is what I never liked about it, right?
Ouch.
I'll give you
I'll
a
give you a reason.
I'll give you a reason to cry. Exactly, you're right. You want to cry?
I'll give you a reason.
But like
right.
there is something about the sulking that they pick up on, which is not only related to like the impotency, like not going forward or not moving, but also the emotional, the emptiness of their emotional stuckness, right? That they're so stuck. They sulk in the tent. Let's just. I think a lot of us know the end of the story. So like Moshe is basically retelling the spy story. Some of the things that are different about it, of course, are the way he's telling the story is completely different than the way that it was told, both in the book of Numbers. And it's also interesting that it's in his retelling now. He first tells a story where he was overwhelmed and needed to appoint help. And then the second story is where the story of the Israelites needing help. Like, what are these first two opening acts of the book of Devarim? First, locating us in liminality and stuck in what could have been a straight journey becomes a longer journey. The second story is that Moshe takes credit for something that his father-in-law gave him, but in the end, it's the retelling. He could have told a lot of other things first, but he first wants to say, we were lost, and then I was lost, and then you were lost. It's like an interesting retelling of the book of Devarim. Like, I was lost, like I needed help, and then you guys were afraid and lost, and then you needed help. He doesn't blame them for sending the spies. He blames them for believing the spies and for sulking in their tents. Okay. Anybody, thoughts? Let's start with you, Rabbi
So
Glasses.
what's the question?
I don't know, anything, what's hitting you here? Like, why do we start with this story? Why is Moshe taking credit for the story? Why does Moshe change the story? Does changing the story, like, help, hurt, hinder? Like, what's up? Like,
I'm struck by something a little bit different. It's the refrain of aloneness, right? It's like Moshe feels alone. We're about to read Echa, where the Jewish people sit alone, and the people feel alone as they face the prospect of going to the land. It's like all this aloneness, and it seems like the medicine for that is actually getting help.
the medicine for that is getting help. So, like, the phrase levad appears in the first story. It appears, obviously, lo tov ha'yod adam levado. There's clearly a play in the first narrative in Exodus where Jethro comes. Jethro, who clearly knows all of Torah, so he's intertextually relating his advice to what happened in the book of Genesis, but jokingly. But whoever writes the story of Jethro is framing it as an alone story, and being alone in the Bible is not a good thing in some existential sense. And so the answer to that is to get support, right? Which is why, but the spy story, Moshe is, even though Moshe asked for help, he now says that they asked for help, right? In the first telling of the spy story, it was God who told them, Shlach lecha anashim. God comes and says, make sure you go. But now, in the book of Deuteronomy, where Moshe is very open and vulnerable, he says, I needed help, so I came up with this idea. And now you needed help, which was fine. But what goes wrong in the spy story in Moshe's telling? I mean, I don't like the way the spy story rolls. I mean, it's like, I wish that it would have been like they needed help, they were scared.
Yeah.
And but maybe because they refused help, even after Moshe tried to convince them that it would be okay, like they're completely resisting it. Almost
It feels
like
like the
backing.
whole wilderness story is a refusal. It's like a refusal of the breast, right? It's a refusal
They push
of
away the nurturance.
Yeah, refusal of nurturance.
The support that they.
Refusal, yeah. And that sense of emunah, which means the heart of the concept of faith is actually to suckle and to nurture and to refuse that nurturance. And again, that complaint means they're refusing what's there and wishing for something else, because there's something about taking what's there that's actually too threatening. I
Right.
see some hands are up, by the way.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rob. It's so hard to keep turning this thing. But
Unfortunately, I grew up in the era of movies, so I look at everything in movie form. This movie makes no sense.
this movie makes
Yeah,
no
no,
sense.
because, no, a family goes down to Egypt because of the famine.
Right.
They were thrown into slavery and they emerge as a nation
Right.
through this whole process. There should be a big pep talk here. Guys, we're going into the land. It's going to be so fantastic. We're going to kill everybody, and we're taking over the entire land as we promised. I mean, that's the finale. Was we're going in, and
Game of Thrones,
this
yeah,
is the
exactly.
promised land,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
This is all we're recriminating about all the difficult things that took place to us, the terrible things that. And to me, I'll
Yes.
just give you my opinion.
Sure.
It just shows that Moshe.
Yeah. It's not.
He's not the right guy.
He's not the right guy.
Oh, really?
He's not, he's
He
not.
should
the-
step down.
He should, yes.
He is stepping
He
down.
did
No,
step
he's
down.
not the
In other
right
words,
guy.
even though we have such a hard time with the reason why Moshe was not allowed to go into the land, like we think, like
Time for him to
really,
step down.
it's like he shows us in the first, in his retelling, we give him a chance to have the, he's going to become a great speaker, but at least in the first couple of chapters, we're reminded that he can't let go of his hurts and his pain. And by the way, just to underscore this, we're not going to get to this because we only have
Wait,
like
do you
3
think he's
minutes.
the wrong guy the whole time?
The whole time, or
I,
just
I think he was the
Just
right
now.
guy to bring them to this point.
I see.
Right.
Yeah.
He's
Now
right.
it's not
I
right.
agree.
He's gotta
Okay,
go.
all
right.
And he
Okay.
shows it by denigrating.
Yes, no, I hear
Others,
you.
you know,
We didn't
it's-
even get to this. If you turn the page, Caroline, sorry, but if you turn the page to verse 37, after he tells the whole story about how God got pissed off at the spies, right? What is Moshe? What is one of the most glaring mistellings of what really took place? Verse 37. Gam bi hitanaf Adonai biglalchem lemor gam ata lo tavo sham. Verse 37, in this telling, if you, by the way, you could, again, maybe multiple authors, multiple versions of the Torah that got pastiched together and the editor is really crappy or had wanted us to have multiple different storylines. But what's the reason Moshe doesn't go into the land? Because God says to him, speak to the rock, and what does he do? He hits the rock twice. Here he says, no, God got angry at me on your account at that moment and said, you can't go in. No mention of his own accountability. It was my fault, it was your fault. So there's something about Moshe here that that you could say, he says he blames them and says that God said Yeshua's going to bring in, but maybe because he blamed them, Yeshua's going to go in. In other words, it's not God, in his telling of the story,
It's a failure of leadership.
it's a failure of leadership. The way that Rob is imagining Moshe, that in this moment, and by the way, I doubt that you would hear this version in Chabad or in other places. So I just want to say, that I want to just give us, we have radical freedom here to talk about Moshe in ways that they would be like, oh, you can't, I can't believe, no, you can't say that. Khalila, you can't say no.
But in other places, all you can do is criticize Moshe.
Right.
You can't praise him.
You can't praise Moshe, right, exactly. Exactly. In this place. Here, you mean, or?
No, in other places.
In other
Here we can
places,
praise
we
Moshe.
can praise Moshe.
I'll praise Moshe.
We can praise Moshe, but we can also admit that that in this moment, as he's beginning to retell the story, his retelling itself has elements that are really beautiful, right? He says that I needed